Okay, the 2023 Salt Lake Housing Forecast Report is now available on slrealtor.com, and you can also actually scan the QR code here to get the report. And then that's during the presentation, and afterwards we'll have the slide presentation available on slrealtor.com as well. So, okay. This year, I have the pleasure again to introduce our first speaker, and that's James Wood, who is an Ivory Boyer Senior Fellow of the Kem C. Gardner Policy Institute at the University of Utah. James specializes in several research areas, including housing, construction, real estate, and economic development. Mr. Wood was published over 100 articles and studies related to the Utah economy and has conducted numerous studies on local housing market conditions. He was also the principal investigator on a Sustainable Communities grant through the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Jim is a member of the Governor's Council of Economic Advisors and serves on the board of the Salt Lake Home Builders Association, the Salt Lake County Housing Trust Fund, NeighborWorks Salt Lake, and is a member of the State of Utah Revenue Assumptions Working Group. So please welcome James Wood.
Oh, thank you. It's good to be with you again. I'm suffering from a couple of problems this morning. One is I have gout on my right foot, so I need help, and also I suffer long-term from vertigo, and today is, you're all moving a little bit out there. But yeah, the Hokas were the only shoes I could get on this morning on my right foot. So it's just one of those things, but I'll recover, and I think the Utah economy and certainly the real estate market, I think are doing better than my foot and my dizziness. But anyway, it is really an honor and a pleasure to be here. Thank you, the board, for the opportunity. And I got to thank UtahRealEstate.com again, Brad and your shop. Invaluable, the data that we get from them. Without those data, would be, as I've often said, would be flying blind. Just going to run through quickly a few questions that I often get asked about where the Utah economy is now. And going to start with, and I hope you can all see this. The question is, will Utah have a recession? Well, first of all, there's no real definition for a state recession. Recession is a national concept, and whether or not Utah will have a recession, we had that discussion in a group called the Revenue Assumption Working Group that comes up with the forecast for the state, both the legislative side and the executive branch for revenue. And we kind of agreed that Utah has a long-term historical growth rate in employment of 3%. So if we get down to less than 1% in job growth, then we would be in a recessionary environment. Then the national economy would very likely be in a recession if we got that low. And our forecast, and we do a consensus forecast 4 times a year, and the most recent was in October. And in that forecast, we had the 2023 employment growth at about 2% and 2024 at 1.7%. And it was a good discussion, some controversy. I think those are a little pessimistic. I was more on the optimistic side. We first came in with higher rates, and then in the discussion it did come down. But you can see from this chart that we don't very often have, Utah seldom has job loss. And of course the Great Recession is the case in point where we lost 6% of the labor force, 80,000 jobs. And we don't expect employment to get down to 1% or less. So will Utah have a recession? I don't believe they will, and our forecast, the official forecast for the state, doesn't point to a recession in 23 and 24. Next question. Does Utah have a housing bubble? In my view, we've only had 2 housing bubbles. You really don't know if you have a bubble until after, and then it bursts, and you look back and you look at the data and you say, yeah, we did have a housing bubble. We had a serious bubble, like almost all every state in the Great Recession, where Utah housing prices dropped by over 20%. We had 16 consecutive quarters of price decline, not deceleration in price, but actual price decline. You can see that from the chart. Those red bars, the worst quarter was down 10% over the previous year. And then we had another weak period in the 1980s. But where are we now? Greenspan did define a housing bubble, and he called it a prolonged period of price decline. And I don't see that we're going to have a prolonged period of price decline. We'll talk about prices in a minute, where we think those will go. But for now, no, we do not have a housing bubble. Those are very rare in Utah. But what set off the concern, of course, is inflation. And what about inflation? Well, the Fed board they have a forecast, and they use a different index. This is the Consumer Price Index. The Fed uses what's called the Personal Consumption Expenditure Index, which is a little bit different, a little bit lower rates actually, but they show that trending down over the next 12 months or so. So I think we're going to see probably inflation based on what the Fed sees, probably inflation dropping down below 6% and somewhere between 5 and 6% this next year. Now, you look at that chart, and we had several years from 2012 out to 2022 where the Consumer Price Index was increasing at 2% or less a year, a long period of very low inflation. Then we had this spike. What caused the spike? In my view, you can point to the pandemic, COVID-19, the virus and the response to the virus. And I think there are 3 things you can look at. One is the fiscal response by the government to the pandemic and to the virus. Secondly, it's what it did to the supply chain. And third, then, not the pandemic, but the Ukraine war also added to. So we kind of hit the trifecta when it came to inflationary causes, and so we had this sudden spike. But you got to remember back, in the pandemic, and I know we were trying to make forecasts in March and April of 2020. What's going to go on? What's going to happen to the Utah economy? What's going to happen to the housing market? We've got this virus. We don't know anything about it. We don't know the toxicity of it. It looks like it's airborne. People can be asymptomatic. So, it seems to be very dangerous. And so Congress acted immediately, unheard of, within 2 weeks passed the CARES Act, which was over $2 trillion. And they added 2 more pieces of legislation that put about $5.1 trillion into the economy, and some of that is still being spent. But so that was one cause, and then the supply chain, and that really centers on China, and of course the most, I think, often discussed, and the supply chain really, a lot of construction certainly has been disrupted by supply. We get a fair amount of construction materials from China, but also, of course, what happened with automobiles and the chip and deliveries were delayed, and prices went up because of the supply chain. We're still suffering from that. And then the Ukraine war with what it did to energy prices and commodity prices. So inflation, it brought the Fed into the game, and they've been very aggressive. And that's a long discussion about whether or not they got in early enough, but they're in now, and they're determined really to break the back of inflation and inflationary expectations. That's what they're really after. And so it looks like they're going to hold, even though yesterday the CPI came down again for the sixth consecutive month. The Fed looks like they're probably going to raise rates at a little bit lower rate over the next couple of sessions, but they're going to hold rates pretty high, I think, through 2023, and I'm sure Lawrence has views on this, and he'll discuss that. What's the outlook for mortgage rates? Again, the Fed's going to hold interest rates high. Mortgage rates, if you look at this chart from, that's January, where it shows 3.2% was the mortgage rate in January, and by October it increased to 7%. I went back to the Freddie Mac data and looked at 9 months from the mid-1970s to the present. That's the fastest increase in the mortgage rate that we've ever seen. So that really hurt the housing market, and real estate agents and home builders. I'm on the board of the Salt Lake Home Builders, and as one member said last meeting, my phone stopped ringing in May. We have overbuilt on the housing side. Many of the major builders have excess inventory. You're going to see some price discounts on housing, and particularly from some of the national outfits that are in the market, and they get a corporate letter to get out of that subdivision, and they cut prices. And we've actually seen that in one subdivision up north in Farmington. Prices of the new homes were cut by $100,000, which really hurt our local builders who were next door. But mortgage rates, they vary widely in terms of the prediction of anything from 5% to 9%. The most optimistic that I've seen is the Mortgage Bankers Association. They have by the fourth quarter of 2023, 5.2%. I think that's pretty optimistic. I think it's going to bounce between 6.5 and 7.5 during 2023. Will a downward trend in prices continue? We've dropped, and again, you can see in this chart, in May, things just stopped and prices started coming down. These are year-over prices, monthly prices, so comparing May 2022 to 2021. And you can see that we did come down. That's about 14%, 13 to 14%. This next chart shows that for the first 3 or 4 months of this year, or of 2022, we held at increases of, which are unsustainable really, but a 25% increase. And then when interest rates went up, it just really started to drop, put huge downward pressure on prices. And for the first month in years, in December of this year, we had an actual year-over price decline. Now, where were prices, in my view, and we have some discussion in our office over this and different opinions, but I believe that we'll probably see price declines, year-over price declines in the first and the second quarter of 2023. But the prices will begin to stabilize by the third and fourth quarter. And I got a bet with Dayon Eskick, who I hope some of you have met. He's my colleague, and he's working a lot on housing. He's been with us, the Gardner Policy Institute, for about 5 years. and he's deeply involved in the housing market, but he's a little more pessimistic than I am. I think where we will be, and we got a bet on our beards, whoever loses has to shave the beard. I think year over, our 2023 number for Utah will be about where we are in the annual number for 2022. And so prices will hold. And one of the reasons I feel that way is there just aren't desperate sellers out there in the market like there were in 2008, where we lost 80,000 jobs and foreclosures. People didn't have any choice but to get out of their home. They were underwater quickly with what happened with value. And we don't have that now. We show employment growth the next couple of years. If we went back to that second chart where it shows housing prices, where all those red bars going down, those occurred in weak job markets. Well, you get I don't think we can have housing prices go down when we're still having job growth, and our projection for unemployment for 2024 is 3.4%. I don't think we're going to have prices go down when we have strong fundamentals and we're still growing demographically and economically. So I think, the first couple of quarters of this year we'll see some decline, but we're going to see prices stabilize, and then I hope by 2024 we'll get modest increases again. Maybe not. Maybe it'll stabilize for a few years or flatline. But after all, in 5 years, housing prices in Utah doubled, and we led the country in price increases. So it's time for a breathing spell, I think, and we'll see a little bit of retreat in prices and stabilization. Will sales pick up in 2023? Well, this is going to be, I think 2023 it'll be tough for sales. It's going to be tough for real estate agents. It's going to be tough for home builders. And again, my reasoning on this is that sellers step back. Wait for the dust to settle. I got equity in my home. Values have doubled in 5 years. I don't need to sell. We haven't had job loss at all. But so you've got reluctant sellers and you've got priced out buyers because we've had such an increase in housing prices. So I think sales will probably be about somewhere between 12 and 13,000 for the county. That's for all types of residential, single-family condo, twin home, and townhome. So it's going to be, just not a year of celebration, I don't think, but just hang in there. 2024 will be better. Just to summarize, no housing bubble, inflation to ease between 5 and 5.5%, mortgage rates to remain high, 6.5 to 7.5. Housing prices will stabilize by the third and fourth quarter. Annual 2023 median price close to annual 2022 price. Residential sales will be sluggish, 12,000 to 13,000 sales for Salt Lake County. And do hang in there. 2024 will be better. So I hope you have good luck, and it's going to be an interesting year. So thank you.
Thanks, Jim. At least we can laugh at how that was presented. I mean, I think everybody of us here were trying to sit back and think, okay, how do we convey a couple things to our clients? And that was just done very well. Just hang in there. I like that. So, all right. Next, I'd like to welcome our next speaker. So Dr. Lawrence Yun is NAR's chief economist. He is responsible for NAR's research activity, including NAR's existing home sales statistics, affordability index, and home buyers and sellers profile report. Lawrence regularly provides commentary on real estate market trends for its 1.4 million realtors. Dr. Yun creates NAR forecasts and participates in forecasting panels such as the Blue Chip Council and the Wall Street Journal Forecasting Survey. He also participates in the Industry Economics Discussion Group at the Joint Center for Housing Studies of Harvard University. He appears regularly on financial news outlets, is a frequent speaker at real estate conferences throughout the United States, here we are again, and has testified before Congress. Dr. Yun has also appeared as a guest on C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Dr. Yun received his undergraduate degree from Purdue University and earned his PhD from the University of Maryland at College Park. I'd like to welcome you, Dr. Yun. Thank you.
Great to be here, and I want to thank President Rob for inviting me, and certainly the National Association President being here in the state of Utah, Kenny Parcell. Certainly I had to, but I just enjoy coming to Utah. Yesterday, as I was flying over, the skies were clear, so I could peek out of the windows of the airplane, and I see the mountains, from the Denver area all along, and I'm thinking, wow, the days before the plane, the days before automobiles, people actually move across the mountain with a pioneer spirit and created such a wonderful city. Just amazing phenomena. I will show you on the data that you can expect more people moving into the region. Knowing that more people are moving into the region into the future, for better or worse, the winner would be people owning property, because as more people come, definitely that will elevate the prices. Now, there was a lot of rumbling about the forecast of this year. So price forecast for this year is somewhat uncertain, but 10 years from now, you will definitely say, yes, I'm glad that I bought a property in 2023. Any small changes, those are really, really small, minor changes compared to what it will be, say, in 10 years from now. So let me go to the chart and go with all the good news, bad news, and everything in between and see what we are finding. I have combination of national data along with locals. Much of the national data tracks what's happening at many, many local and state associations. And let me start with overall home sales, which our realtors members are very interested in. So the beginning of the chart shows in 2019, before the arrival of the ugly COVID virus. And in fact, you can even say that 2019 sales activity were somewhat boring, meaning that no meaningful changes, stable. Then the COVID hit, there was an economic lockdown, sales plunged, but once the lockdown was lifted to say, now you can go about your business, people wanted to buy home. Two factors, something that Dr. Wood mentioned, COVID itself, people are saying, I need a larger size home, especially among the urban office workers who don't have to return to office, and consequently, they were seeking a larger size home. But the other reason was the record low mortgage rate, too good to pass up. People really do not think about mortgage rate as much, but you say to the person, potential client, look, here's a home, and your monthly payment is $1,500. Do you want it? And of course, they jumped at the chance, or whatever the amount their budget would account for. So the real estate market soared, in a sense, during the COVID, maybe a silver lining of the COVID phenomena. But in 2022, down, 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 just as the mortgage rates were rising, and it is quite painful by the time that we reach the fourth quarter. First quarter was somewhat decent. Second quarter, it's unhappy. Third quarter, painful, but fourth quarter was really, really turning ugly. In terms of the percentage changes, it looks like the following. So the same figures I put as a percentage change. So pre-COVID, very stable. Then we had the COVID real estate boom, but the impact of higher interest rate, you can see the sales coming down nationwide about 35%, but towards the end of the year, I think the local area of the Salt Lake, you are down almost like 50% in the December figure versus the December of last year in terms of the unit sales, not prices. Prices are still holding on, but unit sales are down. You go into a super expensive market of California or Seattle, they're down 50%, 60%, even larger declines. Areas where the declines are minimal are very affordable regions in the Midwest. Because prices are still very affordable, median prices at around $200,000, $250,000, changes in mortgage rate do not impact mortgage payment as much. So the Midwest, a very lighter decline compared to the high-cost regions. Now, on an annual sales basis, it looks like the following to give you sort of a longer perspective. So this is from year 2000. So year 2000, then there was a steady sales increase. In hindsight, it was an artificial increase in home sales driven by those subprime lending, no income documentation. You want a mortgage? Here it is. Somehow the Wall Street figured out that they can provide mortgages to anyone who wanted it. Big mistake, led to the implosion of the mortgage market, foreclosure crisis, and the housing market struggle in terms of the sales activity right in the middle, 2007, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So multiple years of sort of sluggish sales. Then we got out of it. Things were doing well. And again, up to 2021, COVID real estate boom, very, very strong until last year when things were coming down. So last year, in essence, we're matching the year 2000 level of sales activity. So this 22-year cycle, it seemed like we went through ups and downs, and 2022 is just matching up to year 2000. The home prices in the meantime. Salt Lake City metro median prices, you can see the movement. Middle of the graph shows the foreclosure crisis. So something Dr. Wood mentioned about many, many quarters of actual price decline. But then you look in terms of the longer term picture. If you were a homeowner back in the year 2000, long-time resident homeowners, you will not believe this. Median home price in the local area was about $140,000. Typical home, $140,000. And you are saying, darn it, I should have bought a few more extra back then. But that was the case. And then we had the housing market bubble, then the crash. But let's say you bought it at the wrong time during the bubble. So you bought it at the wrong time on the bubble. The median price at that time was not even $300,000, $280,000 or something like that. So if you bought at the wrong time during the bubble, but you held on to say, look, I have to raise the family, I have to do my normal things. So you went through the process, and what do you know? Even if you bought at the wrong time in 2005, today you are substantially wealthier because of the real estate boom that has occurred in the local areas. Salt Lake City is special. So this graph is not for the rest of the country. This is for your region, as you are seeing the people moving into the area. So this is the chart. And the latest data show a little modest price decline. Maybe this is a seasonal factor. Normally during spring and summer season, larger size homes get sold because families with school-age children, they want to make the move during the summer vacation. So they want those larger size home transactions. That's why the median prices are high. If the person does not have a children or single person, they buy in the winter months, so the prices tend to be a little lower. So it could be a little seasonal factor, but even this small decline, I mean, is a very minor in terms of the long-term relationship. In terms of the price appreciation, same graph, but in terms of the percentage change conditions, you see that most of the years it is positive, few times it is negative, including the subprime lending implosion period. But what is interesting this time is the following. The level of price increases that occurred in 2020, 2021, these are remarkable gains. You have never seen something like this. These are gains of 25% from 1 year before. So very, very high gains, naturally raising the question, is it a bubble? Surely we don't have the subprime lending, so something is a little different, but can prices, having risen this much, and somebody who is just coming into the area as a free agent, meaning that they don't have jobs lined up. They are coming into the region thinking that, well, I heard that in Utah it's a safer community, good place to raise a family. I want to find some job, raise a family, but they cannot afford to buy because it is very, very expensive. So given that, are the prices in Salt Lake City just simply too expensive and maybe need to come down? What is going to happen? So given this huge price increases, there's some question about, well, now with the sales slowing down, certainly in order to get the deals done, multiple offers, those situations are well over. Given that, how much price concession? Well, if you price the home correctly, based on the market condition, you can do the normal price negotiation of about 5%. Whatever list price, you expect about 5% price negotiation and you get a deal done. And usually you can do that within the first 2 weeks. But the homes stay on the market because you mispriced the home from the get-go. Stay on the homes on the market for longer than 3 months. Then you are looking at price discount of about 11%, 12% range. Some common sense that we all know that longer the days on the market, you have to readjust the price, but these are some actual data that's popping out. This is a national data, but I'm sure that Salt Lake multiple listing service data will show something very similar to this trend. Price increases have been very large. And also, there's so much media discussion. You can go to any web pages and the people are discussing how much of a home price crash would it happen. Given the fresh memory of 2008-2010 period, which is just a decade ago, a little over a decade ago, people have memory of those. The question of a price crash is a very valid question. Maybe some people remember one of their family members went through the foreclosure crisis and they don't want to go through this by buying at the wrong time. So the questions are very relevant, but let's look at the factual information. So rather than saying, well, the prices will be stable or it will crash by 15%, let's look at some factual, fundamental, underlying data. First, job cuts. Back then, implosion of the mortgages led to an 8 million net job losses across the country. Today, at least as of currently, there are no net job losses, no net. Tech companies are laying off workers, mortgage brokers are being laid off, Wall Street is beginning to lay off people, but there's still job creation. So net, there is no net job losses. The job gains are being outweighed by job losses. So that's one big difference. Second part is how many people actually have jobs currently. So W-2 statement salary, which realtors are not part of this group because your income fluctuates up and down, but among people with steady income, how many are receiving steady income? 130 million people were working a decade ago. Today it is 153 million people working. So far more additional buffer room in terms of people with job able to pay mortgages. What about total jobs, including independent contractors? Again, 20 million more people working today. Subprime lending, widely prevalent back then. Part of the RPAC, everything we discuss in Washington is to say, look, we want real estate to be healthy. One of the healthy requirements for real estate is to make sure subprime lending never returns. So Washington passed a common sense legislation. What is that legislation? Ability to repay. Show the document, make sure you can stay within the budget, then we will provide you with the loan. So they passed the legislation, therefore we don't have to worry about any implosion of the mortgages. What about home building activity? It was a wild, active, robust building activity A decade ago, so there was an oversupply. This time around, yes, builders are feeling nervous, but there's really no overbuilding. I mean, they do have some inventory they have to clear out, but it's not the case of what it was a decade ago in terms of actual numbers, 7.65 million versus 4.6 million. Inventory of homes out on the marketplace, 4 million homes nationwide, for sale, 4 million of them. Today it is only 1 million, far lacking in supply. Mortgage delinquency, much lower. Foreclosures, much lower now. In fact, if we look at the mortgage delinquency, people who are seriously delinquent, meaning they miss payment for more than 3 straight months. So it's not a single month, but 3 straight months they have missed out. This is the figure. It is touching at historically low levels. I mean, in any free society, there would be people struggling through because there are some job losses here and there, but overall condition is historically low levels. There was an increase during the COVID lockdown because people lost jobs, they didn't know what to do. Should they pay mortgage or not? But once the economy was back to normal, people were paying their mortgages. Number of distressed property sales. How many in foreclosures or how many short sales? I know there has been quite a sizable growth in realtor membership, and some of the realtors may not even know what a short sale is. But the short sale back then was combining about 1/3 of the transaction. What is a short sale? Well, because prices have plunged and you have to sell the home, you sell the home and you get the proceeds. But the proceed is unable to fully pay off the mortgage balance. So you are short. So you need a bank approval to say, bank said, okay, you are short, but we will let you do the sale. So you require some short sales, but as you can see, it is almost non-existent. You don't have to study what a short sale is because it's not required in today's economy. Inventory condition, as I mentioned, just showing graphically, it looks like this. So when you have oversupply, prices plunge. Today, it is a super tight inventory condition. And here's the interesting thing. Housing value and mortgage debt. Blue line is total asset collateral value. What is your home value? And you add up this across the country among all homeowners. That's the blue line. Red line is how much mortgage do you have? So what you see on the chart, again, the graph begins from year 2000. So what you see on the chart is that in the 2000 to 2010 period, home values increased at a time when mortgage borrowing increased. You can't even actually say that because people were able to get a mortgage, it elevated the prices. This time around, you can see mortgage debt is not rising that much at all. So it is fundamentally different. Your past clients are very healthy financially because the gap between the blue and the red is substantial. In fact, you may want to call them sometime this week or next week just to say, how are you doing? Because homeowners today, despite all the headlines of housing market crash, housing is stumbling, all the bad news regarding the housing market, your past clients are quite happy. And they associate that happiness with the fact that they were able to purchase their home, and they have sizable equity, sizable wealth gain, and you want to make your past client associate that happiness with your service. So you just want to remind them, because what we find in the home buyer seller report is that much of the home buyers, when you ask a question about a realtor, they say, no, I'm not sure how I view realtors. Certainly people have a very negative view of Washington politicians or say the legal profession, but realtors, they don't really necessarily have a positive view. But if you ask, what about the realtor that you actually work with? Put a face to it, name to it, and they say, oh, I love my realtors. So they're in a happy mood, and the home buyers and home sellers would say that they would recommend their realtor, their specific realtors to their friends, business colleagues, and others. So you want to relay this message. Again, just say hello to them because they're in a happy mood. There's very little mortgage delinquency. They have built wealth. They're in a happy mood, and you want to associate that happy mood with your service so that you can get the future referral or repeat business. Now, oversupply situation. Yes, builders are cautious because unlike existing home sales on the multiple listing service, builders are trying to sign the contract before actually digging the ground. Here's a plot of land, do you want to buy? And when the mortgage rate was 3%, they said, yeah, I want to buy it. But by the time the home is completed, after 9 months, after 12 months, mortgage rate had risen to 6%, I cannot do it. So there was an increased cancellation, and naturally the builders are very cautious. Builders are doing some discount, other incentives. Once home is completed, believe it or not, it's still selling. I mean, it may take a little longer, you may require discount, but it's not the case of just lingering in the market for a long, long period. Because what we are finding is that the building activity over the years, this is a very, very long chart from 1960. Many of you were not even born that. The blue line is the historical average, just to illustrate that over the past 15 years, we have been underproducing in relation to historical average. We have been underproducing in relation to the population growth. Before COVID, we already had a housing shortage before COVID. It simply got worse during the COVID real estate boom. So this shortage will still linger, especially if somehow mortgage rate begins to decline and the buyer somehow returns to the market. We will again face housing shortage. There's no oversupply situation. Now, there may be some oversupply in the apartment sector because there has been an active apartment building currently running at 40-year high levels. So I know that in Salt Lake City, so many new residents coming into the country is getting quickly filled up. But based on the apartment building's condition, I think that the vacancy rate may begin to rise, not because people do not want to seek out their own units. It's just simply that there's massive supply coming on in the apartment sector. And therefore, apartment rents, which have been super strong. So if you're real estate investors, apartment rent rises, your single family rent rises also. So if you're real estate investors, you have pretty good years. But I think the rent growth will begin to calm down much more just because we have additional supply coming onto the market regarding rental housing. Ownership housing, we are lacking. Single-family home construction, we are still short, especially if the buyers steadily return. So the first week of January, when I look at the figure, is that surprisingly, even with all the negative headlines out there, home prices across the country were still up 2.2% from 1 year before, holding on. But the home sales are down 34%, contract is down 31.7%, sales to list price, it looks like about 5% price negotiation to get the deals done. Days on the market, 28 days. These are still swift. I mean, it's much longer days compared to the recent times, but pre-COVID, it was very normal for the homes to be on the market for 2 months. So to say the contract is being signed within a month, that is a still fast pace. And you say, how is that possible if people are not buying? Well, there's lack of buyers, but there's also lack of supply, which means among those buyers who are still in the market, they're looking for the fresh listing. Soon as one pops out, they say, oh, let me take a look. It's good enough. I want to make a bid. But then there's 2 or 3 other additional buyers out there. And consequently, the days on the market is still running a little fast. Active listing overall is still up because, again, homes are lingering on the market for a little longer. But the last line is interesting. Fresh listings are down. Something that was alluded to, people are loving their 3% interest rate. I know they had additional child in the family. They need that additional bedroom, but they said, no, we love our 3% more than the baby. So they're going to stay at their home until. So the fresh listings are not coming around. Now some hopeful sign that the worst in demand contraction, buyers have retreated. But perhaps the buyers will steadily return to the market because there are some hopeful signs that the mortgage rate may have already peaked. I know Dr. Wood mentioned that something like he thinks mortgage rate will be 6.5% to 7.5%, bouncing around that range. I think it may have already peaked at 7% and now is on a downward path. Certainly don't expect 3%. Nope, it's not going to happen. 4%, not going to happen. 5%, probably not. But 5.5%, I think, is a distinct possibility. So it's not opening the gate for buyers in a massive amount, but it's still opening up gate for some buyers to come back to the market. because mortgage rate of 7% in early November, well, the latest reading is 6.3%. And I think it could definitely go down under 6% even within a month. And here's a reason. Here's a two graph. Red is the 30-year fixed rate average. Blue is the government borrowing rate. U.S. government runs a deficit, they have to borrow money, they have to pay interest. One of the things that RPEC does, among many, many things, is to say that middle-class Americans should be able to own a property. American dream means owning a property. So in that process, we said Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, FHA, Veterans Affairs, it should have government guarantee, meaning that somehow they cannot repay the mortgage, well, it's guaranteed, and therefore the money will still flow into the mortgage market, knowing that the investors will get their money back if the homeowners default on their mortgage. So given through this process, mortgage rate would be only a little bit above the government borrowing rate. So whatever government borrows, mortgage rate would be only a little bit higher. Middle-class Americans would have access to this low interest rate, almost similar to the government borrowing rate. Two lines move very, very similarly together. But if you were to use a microscope and dive into the data a little further, what you find is the following. This is the spread between the two. Let me go back to the prior graph. See the gap? So I'm trying to measure the gap between the red and the blue. So here's the gap. So historical gap is that blue line, 170 basis point. Sometimes the gap is a little larger than the normal, other times a little less. One time that it occurred, large gap, was in 2008 when Lehman Brothers went bankrupt, right before the foreclosure crisis. That caused a massive panic in Wall Street. Not a panic for you. Your money in the bank, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, all safe. FDIC guarantee, your money is safe. But in Wall Street, they were panicking about bank run within the Wall Street. So because of that panic, you see the widespread. But then it disappeared, that spread disappeared. The second large panic occurred in March 2020 when COVID arrived. What's gonna happen? No one knew. So there was a widespread. Then it disappeared. Now we are in the case of this third abnormal situation. Based on history, it would say this abnormality would disappear within 4, 5, 6 months. Maybe by springtime, this abnormality will disappear. Even if we just get back to just normal spread, again, Veterans Affairs mortgage, government guarantee, most of your clients get sold to Fannie and Freddie, government guarantee. Given that, if it goes back to normal spread, today's mortgage rate should be 5.5%, not 6.3. So I'm a little hopeful that there's more room for the mortgage rate to decline, and as the mortgage rate decline, some of your clients who are shocked at 7% may say, 5.5, not bad. I think I can do it, especially knowing that 3% and 4% will never occur, at least in this lifetime. So I think that's a possibility where people may begin to come back. Given that mortgage rates have declined, we are also seeing a little stirring among buyer interest in this simple survey by Fannie Mae. Simple question, is it a good time to buy a home? Well, here's the graph. People have been saying, no, it's not a good time in recent months. But if you look at the data, at least slight uptick, and maybe this is due to the little falling in mortgage rates. So maybe the worst part on the consumer sentiment is over, and maybe people will start coming back. Mortgage data, we're still not seeing it coming back yet. So we know the mortgage rates are a little lower, but people filing for mortgages to buy a home is not yet turning upwards yet. Not yet. Maybe it will soon do so, but not yet. But one thing that is up is cash transactions. So cash buyers are unimpacted by mortgage rates. They don't care about mortgage rates. So cash buyers are still in the market and certainly not influenced by the market condition. Let me now turn to the broader economy. So this is the US GDP number. So people are saying, is it a recession or not? And Dr. Wood mentioned, well, officially there's a certain methodology that goes into it. And I would say, in fact, there is, I think, a group of 9 economists behind closed door will determine all the data and said whether they will vote to say, okay, how many people say we are in a recession? How many people say no? They will vote. And they may vote, I don't know when. But I don't like that process. Why trust 9%? Why not just let the data speak? If it is a 2 consecutive quarters of a decline, just call it a recession. So GDP declined during COVID situation, so we said we had a short recession. Well, early part of 2022, slight decline. But still it's a decline, so rather than relying on 9 people, just call it a recession. It's very, very mild recession. So, yeah, but however people decide, the GDP right now is moving along the zero line, slightly above, slightly below the zero line. Consumer price inflation beginning to calm down. Prices are still higher. Food prices are really high, 10% above 1 year ago. So it's a daily reminder things are not right, but at least it's beginning to calm down. Gasoline prices are actually lower now compared to 1 year ago. So this may give some reasoning among the Federal Reserve to say maybe we don't have to be so aggressive in raising short-term interest rates. So Federal Reserve will probably do 2 more rounds of rate increase. But the mortgage rate, which you care about, will not be impacted. It's all priced in on what the Federal Reserve will be doing. So when the Fed announces they're raising interest rate by a small amount, I don't know, next month or something like that, it's going to have virtually no impact on mortgage rates. But at least the Fed do not have to be so aggressive if the consumer prices begin to calm down. Related to the job, we have more Americans working now than ever before. That should always be the case. We have rising population. More people means more people should be working. So we now have a record high employment after the COVID lockdown. That early part of the graph shows the COVID lockdown when 20 million people working at hotel, restaurant, completely out of the job, but now we have recovered. Here's a graph that you will love. Okay. The headline, I think you cannot really see it fully. Some states doing better than others. So dark blue, which Utah is included, is showing that much more jobs in the latest information versus March 2020, right before COVID. So I'm comparing the employment today versus right before COVID. And Utah, the number you cannot see in the back, is showing 6.9%. What is 6.9%? 6.9% more job in the state of Utah today versus right before COVID. That many more people with jobs receiving income. Only state that is outdoing Utah is Idaho at 7.0%. But Texas is doing well, Florida is doing well, Carolina is doing well. If you see the orange, those are bad. They're still down. New York has not fully recovered. They're down 1.8%. So there is some variation across the country, but Idaho, number 1, 7.0%, Utah, 6.9%. I mean, you can both say 2 states are right on the lead in that condition. I'm from Washington, and someone asked me during the pre-meeting, how is Washington doing? Well, I said downtown is still empty. The federal government still has a remote work policy. And it's up to the supervisor whether some people need to come into the office or not. And traffic jam is there is no traffic jam because people are still working from home. I mean, I work in DC office as a private organization, National Association of Realtors. So our work requirement is, yes, we need to come to office more frequently. So, there's some people moving, but in DC, I mean, they are, still remote work conditions, but people are saying here in Salt Lake City, no, everybody's just back to normal conditions. And maybe that's why the job numbers are much higher here. And in fact, if I can go back to the prior chart, let me just see it. One variation is the state that reopened its economy sooner are doing better, while the state that had a more severe lockdown is lagging behind. So part of the contribution. And I heard that among the advocacy efforts here locally, that you were talking with the governor to say, look, reopen the economy, real estate is essential, let us do open houses and getting things done. And of course, the other factors are the long-term business climate, whether people want to set up new business or not. Unemployment rate, well, people who are coming to Salt Lake City, they're coming here to work because unemployment rate is very, very low. So the lower graph is Salt Lake City, the upper graph is the US. So unemployment rate running at 2%, which means it's really hard to find a good worker condition. And here's the actual number of people receiving W-2 statement income in Salt Lake City. From year 2000, you see it, 1.1 million people receiving. Today it is 1.7 million, way above pre-COVID condition. So this many jobs, this many additional potential home buyers, this many additional apartment demand. So everything runs positively once the job market is strong. So very, very solid condition in Salt Lake City. Office market, high. I think Salt Lake City vacancy rate is definitely lower than the national average, but I don't think it's lower than pre-COVID condition because office sector is one area that is struggling to come through. Industrial spaces, apartment doing well, retail is slowly coming around, but not office. I show this national office vacancy chart for the simple reason. Some companies are going completely remote, especially some technology companies. If they're based in San Francisco and you don't have to return to office, people are saying, I'm out of here. So they are saying, I can have job near the Bay Area, but I don't have to live in the Bay Area. Where do they go? Maybe they are going to a little more affordable areas. Salt Lake City is not affordable, but by San Francisco standards, it is very affordable. So they can come here and buy all cash properties. So this rising office vacancy rate, maybe it has some economic impact to it, but in terms of residential choices, you will see more people living in, I should say, more people who used to live in the expensive cities of New York City, San Francisco, Los Angeles, beginning to say, no, I want to go to Phoenix. I want to go to other places where things are more affordable, where I believe that things are more better to raise a family. And I think anyone who visited downtown San Francisco will say, you don't want to visit downtown San Francisco. I visited San Francisco like 20 years ago, or first time I visited. I love the city. What an amazing landscape, all this part. But it's just sad how it has just transformed in terms of not returning to, people don't want to go back to office in San Francisco. Here's an interesting data. You can do this. So I did this right before I created this U-Haul rental rate. If you want to rent a rental truck for U-Haul, how much do you have to pay for a 10-foot truck? So if you're going from Salt Lake City to San Francisco, it's going to cost you about $700. Same truck, opposite direction, same mileage. It's much higher. This is indicating that there's more people from San Francisco wanting that truck. They're saying, give me the truck, I want to go to Salt Lake City. Against Phoenix, you see the data against Phoenix. PHX, sorry, this is an airport code, it's Phoenix. So against Salt Lake City, Phoenix, a little advantage on Salt Lake City, meaning that people from Salt Lake City, there's not that strong demand. Against Chicago, well, Chicago is a long distance, so a little more expensive. But again, it's showing that more Chicagoans wants to move to Salt Lake City. Maybe you want to just play with this. Go to website to find out where your potential clients may be coming from. Just look at the variation. This is saying, there's large gap with San Francisco. Only area where Salt Lake City is losing out is to Boise. So there's a little more extra payment that you have to pay to go to Boise versus the reverse. Mortgage rate forecast, I went through it. I think the inflation is coming down, and the spread, once the spread comes down, expect mortgage rate possibly to go even under 6%. So I think that will begin to open up the gates, but definitely not the super low interest rate environment. Home sales, I think it will steadily begin to recover. Fourth quarter last year was ugly. That's the last blue line. Fourth quarter was ugly. First quarter looks to be very similar condition. Then the second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter will be slight improvement, not to the real estate boom, but steady improvement. But if you look at the 4 quarters together, I put it in the box, you see that the figure is actually a little lower if you combine all the figures. So the overall home sales this year, in other words, will be a little lighter compared to last year total, annual total, just because that chart, even you have some steady improvement, if you look at the 4 quarter combined, it's going to fall a little short. But the worst condition, I think, in the unit sale is essentially the first quarter of this year, and by spring season, things to improve. Home price forecast, San Francisco will see 15% price decline. I said it publicly, I said it to many people in the media, 15% price decline in San Francisco. Midwest, probably some price increases, minimal price increases. Hard to forecast Boise or Salt Lake City where there's a super strong job growth, but first-time buyers are struggling to get into the market. So really tough to say, but I think it's going to be just minimal negative or minimal positive, or if it's a little more meaningful decline, say 10% decline, take advantage of those, because 10 years from now, you will see that it's much better condition. So the annual forecast, this is a nationwide forecast, 2020 and 2021 real estate boom, double-digit revenue growth, combination of unit sale increase and price increase. So it's a double-digit gain. 2022 is a down year. 2023, in terms of the revenue growth, again, will be down, even though the worst condition is coming to an end. But look, you had a double-digit gains while the declines are in the single digits. And then 2024, just as Dr. Wood mentioned, I would agree with him, that's when things really, really turns bright in 2024. Before ending, let me also give you just a couple of other information. Home sales goes up and down. There's always a real estate cycle. Some years your business is terrific, other years it's quite tough. So you go through a cycle. But one graph that is almost assured is population will steadily increase. And it increased even more in the Salt Lake City region. So given this dynamics, one can always say the following. Okay, home prices may fluctuate over the short term, but let's look at this. 1970 in America, typical home in America in 1970, median price was $23,000. Can you believe that? $23,000. Talk to your grandmother, they will say what it was. Very, very low price home prices. Price of Coca-Cola, price of eggs. Well, we know that things generally rise. Real estate is one of the best hedge ever against inflation. But in addition, in Salt Lake City, where you have a faster job growth, more population coming in, if you're a renter in this economy, 10 years from now, you are a renter, you will be struggling in the local area to say, wow, rents are so expensive. But if you're a homeowner, property owner, you will say, wow, I'm glad I got into Salt Lake City before the other new arrivals came. So I don't know what the future prices are, but I think it's not unreasonable to say the projection of rising condition given the real estate hedge. So let me just end it there, and thank you for your attention, and thank you very much.